So welcome everyone to another episode of Naming in the AI World. And we have a really special treat for you this week. We have a professor from the University of Tennessee who's also an entrepreneur. He started his own research company. And I'm going to ask Jan to tell us a little bit about himself, his background, what he teaches, and a little bit about his company, Mapprio. And then we'll get into some questions about name testing research, and maybe even AI. So, Jan, please tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me. So my name is Jian Huang. I am a professor in computer science at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I'm wearing the Tennessee red today, not the Texas red. And the research that I do is in large data visualization, and then has been for the past 20 years. And of course, right around 2007, 2008, when the White House came out and said the word big data, suddenly everyone has to do big data. But I insist my work is large and not just big. In my research and teaching, I deal with scientific data a lot. And my research is funded by National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, NASA, and so on. And right around 2013, I took a sabbatical and built a new method into a new platform. That is to get and understand human data. So the idea is you could actually do a very interesting observation in an online platform and get very useful information out of it. And the science actually comes from social psychology. So my friend, Professor Gary Stenberg in the psychology department on our campus, he is an advisor. And also through collaborating with him, found out that the reason we can't get real authentic data efficiently is in part because of the user experience is, very monolithic, very, let's say, not trusting. So we got our School of Design involved as well. So Professor Sarah Lowe, she is the design professor. And then as a result of this collaboration, we have a user experience that looks awfully like a very user-friendly survey. However, it is actually about making observations that can peek into people's psychology on a group basis. And that is the story behind Mapprio.
Sounds great. And just to be totally transparent with our audience, we've actually used Jan's Mapprio platform with a number of our clients in the name testing space, which is, of course, what we're all about. And I would agree with Jan that the interface has proven to be much more engaging. We tend to get a higher quality of respondent, when we have the open ends in there. So at least for us, over a few dozen studies, I think, to date, it's worked really well. So, Jan, what I wanted to ask you about, since we're sort of in the naming business, and I know your platform has applications far beyond that, but with respect to naming, what do you see as the make or break issue when it comes to name or brand name testing?
Well, I am not the leading expert, Mike, you are, but from a computer science point of view, it's always this challenge of not being able to meet multiple criteria at the same time, right? So the number one criteria that you hear people talk about the most is the time cost and the limit, the time cost and the dollar cost, and there's a limit to all of that. So that's criteria number one. And criteria number two, everyone talks about needing to reach enough people in the real targeted demographics. However, the third criteria is, I want to say, the really important one. That is, when you engage these people under such strict limits, can you still get scientifically meaningful answers from them? Because if all you meet is the time limit and you hit enough people, so you have a large enough N, but then all of those are supposed to justify why your answer is meaningful. But in a traditional way, I want to say the typical testing that we are seeing out in the field are not meeting the scientifically meaningful criteria.
Right. And one of the things that we've done with your platform, and we just completed a study for a large soft drink manufacturer where we had 600 completes in 2 different parallel studies. And so we were able to do some micro-segmentation and some analysis that was still statistically valid and very insightful. But the thing that I really wanted to ask you about, because to me, this is what sets your platform apart from pretty much everybody else that we've used. And we used to be part of Nielsen, the market research firm, before we started this company a few decades ago. So I don't want to tell anybody how old I am, but it's been a while. But one of the cool things about your platform is it delves into system one thinking as opposed to just system two thinking. So could you elaborate on just what is system one thinking versus system two, and maybe why that's a big deal, especially when it comes to name testing?
This morning I was having coffee together with Gary, so as in Professor Gary Stenberg, and we chatted about a few things. One thing that he said, which was amazingly insightful, and I'm just going to parrot to sound smart for myself too, is name itself is such an interesting construct in our society. If you think about it, almost all of the social identity are related to or even solely about tight named groups. So name has a very special place. And it's not just you hear a name, you say, I logically like it. That's never the case. There is a system one intuitive reactionary part to it. Some name, upon hearing, you already don't like it. You don't even want to know anything more about it. Some names just naturally give you this feeling of, I'm actually intrigued. I already feel engaged. I just hope to learn more about it. So that's where I want to say name testing that's solely based on people's logical answers, which are all that you can get through a traditional questionnaire, you missed the mark. So I can't logic myself into loving something. I love it already. So then how is our platform different? So our platform is really a psychology playground, and it's very playful. But the idea is if we treat people as taking exams, so kids are going through AP exams, trying to get a 5, right? So in that case, their behavior is, I'm scared, I just want to give you the right answer. But if you let them play a little bit, give them some freedom, and there we say we trust them a little bit. In that case, you get to see how people actually behave. Now, of course, the data is a little noisy because human are human. It is not clean, not rigorous all the time. But as long as you have the computing methods to turn noise into actual insights, the notion of letting people play is a net positive. So that's where our platform was designed from a completely different angle. And of course, it was enabled by all of the science progress. One in particular thing I want to name is social cognition. So not my field, so parroting someone else. Social cognition is a place where if we can indeed observe people's collective attention or shared attention of a group of people, we get to understand what matters to them without needing to literally ask. And these are the reactionary, how is your gut feeling about this? So that's where system one psychology data can be obtained. System two psychology, I want to say, it doesn't really exist independent of system one, because if all you say is system two, those are logical answers. So when you take an exam, you are giving that same answers too. So just saying system two doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So when you say system one, then you say system two, suddenly the two sides of the coin both appear.
That's great. And I think one of the things that we've learned and that we've suspected, and I think intuitively this makes a lot of sense, is unless it's a very expensive item, almost nobody thinks about the name. They react to the name. So you think about walking down, a Target aisle or a Walmart aisle, and you're just glancing at products on the shelf. And if a name grabs you, or if the name and the packaging grabs you, you don't really think about, well, do I like it? It just grabs you. It just engages your attention. And then you take the next step, right? And so what we've very successfully used your platform to do, and I think it's one of the most exciting aspects to research that we've seen in decades, is we can still ask those system 2 questions, right? Which is what most research today does. Like, okay, which of these names would make you the most interested in trying the product? Or which of these names fits the positioning? But 95% of the consumers don't even think about names that way. They just react to them. So I believe, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, there's some multiple metrics that you guys allow us to look at, and it includes the order of name selection, right? So if we throw some names up on the screen and let people, as you say, play with those names, move them around with their fingers, what we're looking for is there one name that most respondents immediately pick, right? It's like their first choice, and it's often a very quick choice. And then it's pretty definitive, right? They're not going back later and saying, well, maybe I don't like about it, because that's when you sort of get into that, well, is it that now more system 2? Or do they even pick it at all, right? If it's such a boring, crummy name, they don't even bother. So is that sort of how your platform works, or am I missing something there?
Well, I can't tell you everything, then I have to kill you. But
don't do that.
But for your entire audience, I just want to say that we very openly state that we have not invented new science. No one can. What we did is we built a platform that is online that can make observation of this sort of thing more scalable than before, right? So and so overall, if you imagine there are 2 demographics, so female and say 18 to 34, and female 35 and above. In that case, exactly as Mike said, so if one group just didn't even pick this name A at all, the other group all picked it. Already you know a difference. And then if one group picked this name early and the other late, you already know the difference. So like all big data platforms, a lot of these computations are based on probability. So it's a bunch of probability distribution functions we calculate on the back end. But the constructs we look for involve whether things are picked, so yes, no, whether things are picked early or not, so win versus lose. And then latency is a very interesting thing too. You see latency as a metric used in system 1 ad testing almost all the time. And in I want to say 90% of the time, you see that as the sole metric that's measured. So latency is important. What we're seeing though is if you truly want to make a testing scalable, you can't assume the testing targets are giving you full attention. You cannot, right? They're on their mobile device, they're on their laptop, their kids are shouting in the background. So if you literally just based on latency itself, your data is probably not as reliable as you want it to be. And here's another thing that we know. When we're working data, we find patterns left and right. Whether the patterns actually withstand other tests is the question. So in this case, we use multiple probes. But overall, what we're seeing is just every time when we see different demographics, and actually, Mike, you and I were on the call a few times to discuss what is this pattern saying. But when we separate by micro segments, and we can talk about stereotypes that we all have about people. Well, actually, primarily ourselves, we can laugh about it. So that's where this tool is actually fun to use.
Yeah, I think latency and some of the flaws and some of the other methodologies that are out there that you've uncovered and helped guide us through are hugely important. One other thing that we look at, and this may seem obvious to the listeners, but it's not that obvious when you're in the weeds looking at all this data, is you might find a name that almost everybody in the respondent base reacts to immediately, right? So there's zero latency, there's very little delay, it's picked first, but then you delve into it and all of a sudden you find it's a very polarizing name. That is, everyone picked it first, but you have a fairly sizable segment that just didn't like the name at all, right?
Yep.
And then you have another very sizable segment that loved the name. And that's where the micro-segmentation that you described is so valuable, right? So we may have names for some studies that really resonate with that Gen Z audience and that younger millennial, right? It's a very hip, in vogue, sort of cool, edgy sounding name. They get it. They feel it's like for them. And so they're the ones that are all scoring it immediately and love it. And then we look at
Yep.
the folks my age, right? A little bit older. We aren't into all the Gen Z, younger millennial lingo. The
Yeah.
edginess maybe turns us off a little bit. We
Yep.
react to it quickly, but it's awful, right? Have you
Yes.
seen that in some of the other research that you've done, maybe outside the naming area? And do you have any opinions or guidance about that's something to consider, and maybe there's some other factors to consider or not?
Um, Naming and the branding are, closely related. But if you take one step further on the business cycle, so what is the value proposition? So in that case, it's an important question in the innovation industry. If you take it one step further, even, so how was the experience? What did you expect? Then you get into customer service. We've seen a lot of these patterns similar to what you described. One of honestly, the most fun one I want to share is there are situations where after you test using our approach, if you look at the audience as a whole, so in aggregate, all of the names or all of the items, whatever you're testing, even if it's a service item, come out to be almost the same in priority, almost exactly the same. In that case, you look at it going like, wow, okay, everything is the same. But when you do the segments, so a lot of tools don't give you the ability, but say you can, right? So when you can do the segments, almost never do things stay almost the same.
Right.
It is almost always, suddenly you're still starting to see the separation, see the polars pull away from each other. It is the fact that you have an audience that's really, you're assuming to be the same. That's the problem. And so I was discussing this with a marketing professor in our business school. And he gave me a joke. It's a great joke. That is, if you truly have an average customer, the average customer should be half male, half female. The average customer should not know what age he or she is. The average customer should own every single product that's in every single category and have experienced everything. And then if that's who you're actually targeting, good luck. If that's not, then you actually want to do the segments and see how things are different.
I love the segmentation that we can do with Mapprio. And let's just say a fairly simple segmentation where you're looking at gender crossed by age, or you're looking at age crossed by income. And you really do get some insights, not just about differences, because gals sort of think about certain things very differently than guys do. And they often are more empathetic, and they might like names that are higher touch and that are more inviting, more friendly. And these are gross generalizations, but guys might like something that's a little bit more techy, a little bit more innovative. Not always, right? And then you dive into the age differences, right? And you even get a finer cut as to, well, this isn't common across all gals or all guys. It's very different if you look at that middle segment of maybe the 20 to 40-year-old versus a younger or an older segment. So I know in a lot of the analysis that we do, you do get that seemingly sameness at the initial. Well, all these names are okay, but none of them are great, right? You just sort of, they're all sort of grouped together. But then you start breaking them out by age, by gender, income, and other aspects, and you very quickly discern, oh my gosh, there's a winner here, not just on that system one reaction thinking, but on some of the other metrics we look at, which is pretty exciting.
Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Naming in an AI Age. Join us next week for part 2 as Jen and Mike continue the conversation discussing AI and its impact on market research.